music no one can ever refuse it. Pulsating, vibrating, reggae, reggae, reggae. Very sky, rock, steady, mental, a quadrillion,
wherever you are, this is the Real Stuff Podcast, and today we have a special guest in the Indigenous Outlook, and her name is Professor Diana Fox, and she'll be talking to us about the partnering or the partnership of Indigenous people with the Caribbean Development Bank. And with us also is Flavius, our co-host. Flavius, back to you.
Okay, let's go. So Dan, could you introduce yourself? Tell us a little about you and your guests also.
Sure, absolutely.
And then we'll
Thank
ask him to introduce himself also.
Sure, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Flavius and Courtney. It's a real pleasure to be here again. Hi, everybody who's listening. So I am a professor of anthropology at Bridgewater State University in Massachusetts in the United States, and I have just completed 2 years of living and working in Jamaica, being the university director of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies in the Regional Coordinating Office at the University of the West Indies. And for about 30 years or so, I've been working in the region. I first came to Jamaica in 1991 when I was a graduate student, and I lived in Clarendon Parish, Upper Clarendon Parish, and I did research there. And I've done work partnering with people who are engaged in social movement activism. And for me, that's really important because my discipline of anthropology began as a colonial discipline. And the first anthropologists were colonial anthropologists. And my mission has been to change the way in which anthropologists work with other people around the world in partnerships and collaborations based on beliefs about equality and collaborative engagement. So that's what I've been doing in various ways. I also work in South Asia, in Nepal, in Sri Lanka, and some other places. But for the Caribbean has been my sort of second home for over 30 years. So I worked with Colin Cloutke, Chief Cloutke, from Guyana quite closely. We were part of a research team. And when we get into talking about this project, I'll explain why it is such a important project and how groundbreaking it is in terms of the kinds of partnerships that the university and the Caribbean Development Bank and Indigenous people worked on collectively. So Colin and I did research in some Indigenous villages in Guyana, and wrote a report together, and I have just finished working with my team at IGDS on the final version of that report. So let me turn it over to Colin now, who can introduce himself more fully to you.
Thank you, Dan.
Parolipo, greetings.
Greetings, sir.
Greetings.
I'm Colin Cloutke. As Professor Fox just said, yes, I'm a co-founder of the Guyanese Organization of Indigenous Peoples. I was with them for the past 35 years.
Wow.
So we'll be having our Coral Orange Jubilee this year, 35 years. In fact, 1990 was the year the organization was resuscitated. It was an older, struggling organization, and it's probably still struggling right now, but we managed to survive 35 years. And GOIP basically seeks to self-empower Indigenous Guyanese through education, culture, knowledge of their own history, etc. And the challenge today is converting this into real power. You know, we have theoretical power here in Guyana, but translating this or transforming this into real power has been a sort of a challenge. And we found that education is one way of doing this. We really appreciate the role of the Caribbean Development Bank. You know, they have been showing tremendous interest in our villages in Guyana. And And last May, I think it was, or is it April?
I think it was May.
Yes, we did have the honor of having Professor Fox, and I think it was Psyche. Her name is from the island
Psyche
of Cayman.
Gonzalez, yes.
Yes, that's
Mhm.
right. They were all fantastic persons actually on our research, and we did research in two indigenous villages. The one that I'm familiar with, which I sort of grew up in, Great Falls, and Akawayo village, also known as Aurora Morale, 58 Mile Settlement. And I can tell they really needed research. They needed the presence of Professor Fox there to listen to them. Um, and the concerns that he raised are so many. Um, well, I guess we'll touch on that later. And of course, another village known as Pakuri, which goes by the St. Cuthbert's, the name of the Anglican church in the village. It was very nice, being part of this research. And I suppose as a school teacher by profession, I had a sort of an advantage in being able to relate to people, you know, being able to listen to them and learning from them at the same time in both of these villages. So, well, that's about me. My history is not terribly exciting. I was able to see 21 countries over the past 30 odd years. And traveling is one of my hobbies, but you know, as you reach a certain age, you got to throw in the towel. So one of my challenges here in Guyana too is seeking replacement. I have to pass the baton on to younger folks and with energy and stuff. I can't climb a hill like I used to before. I can't swim across the rivers of Guyana like I used to as a young boy. So these are some of the realities we have to face. So yes,
Paula and I got some good pictures of you in that river.
oh yeah.
Okay, you could
Yes,
send us
I love
some,
water
please.
too.
Yes.
Yes, but that's about it from me so far. You could always ask me any question later on. Thank you.
Okay. Now back to you, Diana. Where in Clarendon did you live?
I lived in Frankfield.
Oh,
And yes, I was there on and off for many years, and I was kind of adopted into a family there. So
okay.
much so, it was headed by a nurse and matron at Spalding's Hospital, and also she was the school nurse at Edwin Allen Regional High School. And I was involved with the community in many ways for many years. And I wrote a book about it. And from there I became connected to the University of the West Indies. But I really spent many years in rural Jamaica before I even came to spent much time in Kingston and with the
Okay.
university.
Yeah, I know Frankfield very well. I worked in
Wonderful.
Clarendon for a while, yes.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah,
Lots
people
of
were all
orange. Yeah,
lots of oranges, indeed. Yes, it's a breadbasket.
yeah. I work for the Water Resources Authority.
Oh, okay.
We measure the rivers at different times of the year to get to know, how much water we have and when you have droughts and things like that.
Right. Yes, the
Very
Rio
s-
Minho is, up and down depending upon the season.
Yeah, and my group was in charge of Clarendon, and that's a very, very exciting place,
It
especially
is.
with rivers, yeah, and the people.
I loved being there. I loved spending time there, and I still am connected to family there.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So, how have your time in Jamaica been?
Well, my time was wonderful. It was very enriching. I loved working with the Institute for Gender and Development Studies and learning more about the university and partnering with quite a few groups. I spent a lot of time in Charlestown, and I was really heartbroken to learn about the passing of the late acting Colonel
Colonel.
Marcia Kim Douglas. So she was part of this research. I was on a research team with both her and Gama Mamaji, Gloria Sims. They were the two co-researchers in Charlestown. And I also worked with one of the IGDS researchers, Alana White. Would you like me to tell you a little bit more about the project?
Oh yeah, but let me tell you, I mean,
Yes. Yes.
incidentally,
Go ahead. Go ahead. Prof.
yeah, incidentally,
Oh, sorry. No.
no,
Yeah. No. You
incidentally,
were frozen,
no,
Courtney.
incidentally, I work with Charleston also.
Oh, you did. In what
No, I
capacity?
do.
Oh, you
I'm
still do.
yeah, I'm the events planner for their conference each year.
Are you really? Oh,
Yes,
wow. I
from
was there,
from the
last year
start
in
to
the
now. Yeah.
conference.
Oh yeah.
Wonderful. I've been going to the conference on and off over the
I
years. It's a
know. I know.
fantastic
Yeah.
event.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful to learn, Flavius.
Yes. So yeah, could you go ahead and tell us about the project and all these
Sure.
wonderful things that people need
So,
to know about?
so I want to give you a little bit of background to how it got started because projects don't emerge out of nowhere. And I think sometimes people are interested, how does the project get started? And often these projects get started through human interactions. And I was very honored to give a couple of years ago the annual development talk for the Edna Manley School of Fine and Performing Arts. I was invited by the Dean Kino Sr., who incidentally had been my student at UE back in 2004 in a Men and Masculinities class. And so he invited me to give the keynote along with Amina Blackwell Meeks. So not something I could turn down. And I decided to use the opportunity to talk about my work with Indigenous peoples of the region, particularly Maroons, who were seeking, as you know from our last visit on this podcast, to be recognized as Indigenous with their indigeneity connected to their African lifeways. Which is obviously very different in some ways from First Peoples, who are first, inhabitants of these lands. Indigeneity is undergoing some discussion in the region. But I also have worked, with Taino folks, the hummingbird Taino community, and that deepened while I was there in Jamaica. So after I gave that talk, I was approached by someone who knew folks at the Caribbean Development Bank and knew that they were looking for a research partner in a university to conduct primary research in a number of Caribbean countries in order to learn more about the needs of Indigenous communities to influence their program of work, so that their program of work, their investments, their loans, their advocacy, which is something that developed along the way, could be enriched through primary data. So I had a meeting with one of the Caribbean Development Bank social analysts, Richardo Aiken, and that led to a submission for a proposal to do the research. And because we're the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, we're interested in, of course, bringing in the element of gender and looking at how men and women's challenges differed, what their needs were, as well as boys and girls. So that was part of the questioning. So our proposal included 6 countries, and over a number of months, we conducted research in a number of different phases with Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, Suriname, Dominica, and Belize. And in Belize, it was with Garifuna and Maya, mostly Garifuna, but some Maya Center Village as well. And so that's a brief overview of how the research got started. And I just want to mention a couple of things that I think, as I said, this was groundbreaking, and then maybe Cullen can join in and say what his thoughts about this. But early on, because of the research I had been doing for many years and emphasis on collaboration, I did not want to propose a top-down project where academics come in to a community and start asking questions and don't know anyone in the community and stay for a short period of time. So I proposed to the bank very early on that we have co-Indigenous researchers, that they are paid equally as the research team from IGDS. And as you may know, the previous year, my office at the IGDS, in conjunction with Vereen Shepard's Center for the Reparation Research, had invited the special rapporteur from the United Nations on Indigenous peoples. And he and his advisor recommended that the bank create an Indigenous Peoples Advisory Group. So along with the IGDS and the special rapporteur, we encouraged the bank to create that advisory group, which they did. And I'll pause because I've been talking for a long time, but the IPAG, the Indigenous Peoples Advisory Group, was very involved at all stages of the development of the research, of the questions that we used, reviewing the questions and the questionnaire, planning the research, helping identify who the co-researchers would be. It was collaborative really from the bottom up. And that is really how research should be done with Indigenous peoples. So I'll pause right now. You know, as a lecturer, I could go on for hours, so I'll force a break on myself.
No, but that is wonderful. So how long the bank is going to keep this group together?
We've recommended that it's permanent,
Okay, wonderful.
that it's institutionalized. That's one of the recommendations coming out of the research.
Wonderful.
Mhm.
Wonderful.
So could you just give us an insight of what kind of programs are available or grants available to the Indigenous people presently?
So we hope some of those will be expanded upon through the bank and their partners based on the findings, which I can also talk about. But right now they have a basic needs fund. That's the primary fund that's available. And the bank has also been, Colin, correct me if I'm wrong, conducting some workshops for Indigenous communities online about applying to these funds and others. One of the findings was that people need to have training. Sometimes these applications are very layered and complex, difficult even for somebody like me who's been applying to grants for so many years. If you're new, you're from a village, you want to apply, you know, they should be made more accessible for people of all backgrounds. And so that's one of the goals of the bank. Do you have anything to add to that, Colin?
Well, I understand what you're saying because we in JYP have had similar experiences accessing funds from various sources. Yes, especially with regards to First Peoples, who, you know, our educational level is not, it's only a tiny minority of Indigenous people have university degrees, so to speak. So when you're going to send an application form to seek funding that is basically like a litmus test for university degree. You know, I have a university degree, and I myself have had difficulties, you know, understanding what the questions are really saying, and you know the interrogative, how they interrogate you, sort of thing. And you know, we understand money is so important. You can't steal it. You know, I understand these systems in place that you will have to safeguard against financial fraud, etc. But at the same time, when it comes to accessing funds from various funding agencies, etc., our Indigenous people generally, you know, have had difficulties sort of meeting the criteria that is requested, and we've had this over and over for years. I haven't seen the application, what is required by the Basic Needs Fund, but eventually I guess I'll see it. But it needs to be more user friendly, more easier to fill out. Our Indigenous people must not be asking for help from different people. Sometimes in the case again, they got to pay bribes to somebody to get something done. And that should not be the done. The paperwork is already difficult. It needs to be much more simpler and user friendly. That's all I got to say.
One of the things that I learned when we were in Pakori Village was that there are sometimes groups either funded by the government or various agencies like the United Nations that come into communities and offer various kinds of workshops. So actually the mom of one of our co-researchers from Pakori Village, Ostasia Simon, Sherry, her name is, she told me about a course she took on parenting and learning how to discipline children without using physical punishment. And I thought that that was really interesting. And she said it was a challenge for her because people grew up with corporal punishment. And there's a lot of research that shows that this kind of discipline has its roots in colonization, in violent systems. And that became passed down over generations. And so there is really a need to address some of the intergenerational traumas from that time. I mean, for Indigenous peoples, the colonial period is not over, right? We're still living in coloniality. And so many of the systems that are in place they're non-Indigenous systems, obviously, but learning how to revive parenting skills that discipline children in ways that encourage the development of themselves as whole people and self-esteem, et cetera, is something that a training that she underwent that she is now passing down into her, to other parents. So one of the values of this kind of research is that it leads to specific kinds of recommendations based on what people need in the community and what they say they need across all kinds of categories of need. And then what we're hoping is that the bank and its partners can think very deeply about how to implement programs and funding sources that help people address these kinds of needs. So I can talk, if you'd like, a little bit more about the categories of needs that we identified.
Sure, but before that, that's a simple question.
Sure.
Is the word going out? Is the bank putting out a word to the indigenous people about these grants? How widespread, how deep that is?
Well, I can answer and then see if Colin wants to say something else about it. 2 years ago, the bank held its first Indigenous Peoples Forum in St. Lucia. And last June, they held it in Canada. And one of the purposes of this forum is to bring together Indigenous leaders from across the region and inform them about their program of work and what is available, and also to find out what else needs to be available. And so the Indigenous Peoples Forums, which are now, I think, going to be a regular annual event at the Board of Governors meetings, are one way of disseminating information. Another way is through the Indigenous Peoples Advisory Group, because the bank then informs the group about what it's hoping to achieve, and then it's the responsibility of the IPAG to then take that information into their communities. But I do think that once they respond to the project, so we're just finalizing the final report. And it's from this final report, based on the research, that they will consider the recommendations, which include opportunities for funding and investments. Once they develop the responses to the recommendations, then I certainly hope that and I believe that they will have a opportunities for wide dissemination. They should be widely disseminated through all of the Indigenous peoples groups, through GOIP, the Guyanese Organization of Indigenous Peoples that Colin works with, through COIP, the Caribbean Organization of Indigenous People, that Nelsia, who works for with the First Peoples of Trinidad and Tobago, and Chief Hernandez, Ricardo Hernandez, is the center of the organizing of COIP that annually brings Indigenous groups to Trinidad for an annual festival. And it's in these kinds of spaces and organizations where the knowledge and information that about the bank's lending opportunities will have to be disseminated. So it's a process. I think the process is being upscaled at the moment and will continue to be as the recommendations are implemented.
Thank you. You can continue now with explaining the different areas, tiers of what's happening, please.
Okay, so the first stage of the research, and this is where I first met Colin in what was called phase 1, was for me to meet with the Indigenous leaders from the different communities on Zoom. We had Zoom meetings. I remember, Colin, very well speaking with you about your recommendations. And the first level was to ask, what are the kinds of needs that you think exist that are important for us to pay attention to? And what also should be the process of conducting research? How do we enter into the communities? What is the ethical approach to do this? And so through that first stage of interviews, we developed a number of different categories, working with the bank and working and being informed by that level of Indigenous peoples input. And a number of categories emerged, such as climate crisis and how it affects communities and livelihood, education and access to education. Colin spoke about many communities who are living in the forests don't have access to university education. They live far away, roads aren't well developed. Even many communities have primary schools relatively nearby, but not secondary schools. Some communities, like Pacori, so education that's driven by community traditions, storytelling practices, ways of making a living, spiritualities, and the like. Healthcare was another category, access to healthcare. Also, again, traditional ways of healing, protection of indigenous plants. These are all related because climate crisis and biodiversity loss are affecting the availability of these plants. The elderly, what are their challenges? Are they isolated? Do they have the supports they need? Youth, what are the challenges with youth, not only with education, but with all kinds of issues, involvement and concern for Indigenous lifeways? How are they being integrated into Indigenous communities, but also being prepared for working in their wider societies? Challenges, as I mentioned, that are distinct for men and women, boys and girls. Many people have to work outside the communities and travel long distances. So there's migration for work, which leaves many households with single parent households. Key issues are land ownerships and land sovereignty, making decisions about how to use land and use Indigenous knowledge that's come down over the generations to protect the environment, and thinking about community and civic engagement and governance issues. To what extent are Indigenous peoples represented by their national governments? What are their local governance structures like? How are people participating in these structures? That's the sort of overview of the categories that we looked at, and we have a very rich body of data coming out of this. I can't hear you, Flavius. You're on mute.
Yeah. How will this report be, or research be presented to the basic people?
Good question. And also Colin can jump in here. Well, another, I think, very important aspect of this project, in addition to having co-Indigenous researchers and the IPAG established, is that we from the IGDS said to the bank that there should be co-ownership of the report. Typically, when these reports are produced, not just by CDB, but various UN organizations and other banks and international development organizations, it's the organizations that have the copyright ownership of the report. But we encouraged, and the bank agreed, and which is a really great sign of their appreciation of collaboration, that this report should be co-owned by the IGDS, by all of the Indigenous groups who were involved, and by the bank itself. So as we finalize in the next few days the formatting details of the report, I'm going to be sending a copy to all of the research teams across all of the 6 countries, and they will then share it with their communities. And so the report will be disseminated that way, and people can use the report for their own purposes. They can use them for writing grants on their own, for determining policies and procedures within their communities, projects that they want to develop. The bank, too, is going to produce some kind of glossy, very abbreviated outline of the findings that they are going to disseminate to their partners. And we at the IGDS we have the opportunity to publish and to give talks. One of the reasons that I'm here with you today and that I was able to talk about this is because of that co-ownership of the report, because I have the latitude, as does Colin. Colin can go anywhere and talk about this. He can use the report for any kind of project development that he thinks GOIP might be interested in, for example, or any other organization. So there are many channels of distribution from the bank to the university and throughout the communities of Indigenous peoples.
So can Indigenous Outlook get a copy?
Indigenous Outlook can get a copy. Absolutely. If Colin wants to send it to you. And I can send it to you too.
Well, I'm asking.
Yes, yes.
Please. Thank you.
Yes, because we have that latitude.
Wonderful, wonderful. That is very good to know. Things are changing, you know.
Yeah, it's part of the whole decolonizing of research, right? Ultimately, what some folks said was that they, ultimately there might be, the university on some level is a middle person, a middle woman, if I can say, instead of a middleman, a middle woman, who sort of engage with the groups. And, as more Indigenous folks do have access to higher education, there will be the possibilities, I think, for lending institutions to work directly with communities. But I do think it was important that the university was involved. I think it's, the University of the West Indies has an Indigenous Peoples fund in Barbados under Sir Hilary Beckles. They established an opportunity for some groups of Indigenous peoples to attend the UE cost-free. Those kinds of projects have to be, and programs have to be expanded. When I was there, I created an Indigenous Studies research cluster that will involve Indigenous peoples working with universities. So the relationship between, governments, universities, Indigenous peoples, lending institutions, all of these kinds of relationships are under transformation. We certainly hope that this project has an impact on governance and that the bank will advocate for Indigenous peoples so that they can be better represented in their national governments and at CARICOM.
Wonderful.
Okay, Professor Dan, what about climate change? Because we know that climate change presently is affecting Indigenous people. Is that part of the funding or part of any kind of program?
It's certainly part of the recommendations, and every community we were in talked about the impact of climate crisis. When Belize was so unbearably hot, people were, the epicenter of climate crisis in the Western Hemisphere is in Central America, and it affects how people can function. It affects children in schools. So there's health issues associated with it. We know, of course, about livelihoods and agriculture and fishing, and all of these endeavors are impacted by lengthier dry seasons and shortened rainfall, and then rainfall when it comes, creating floods. And so we really hope, we made some very strong recommendations about climate change resilience and programs. And farmers themselves, some of them are developing some of these strategies. They have to be upscaled, and I don't know yet what the bank is going to do about this, but I do know that our recommendations are very significant when it comes to these kinds of interventions and support for resilience programs. Colin, do you have anything that you want to share about climate and Guyana, in Indigenous peoples in Guyana?
Yeah, certainly. You remember when we were at Great Falls, you took an opportunity to go have a swim. I was
Yes, I did.
actually, yes, reluctant to go to do that because I knew there was an awful lot of fishes in that area at the set time. And I experienced a piranha bite way back in the year 1977 in another creek in the Upper Damrara, Kaikushikabra Creek. Uh, I was a little schoolboy, teenage schoolboy those days, and I learned quite a lesson. Luckily, it wasn't too damaging. My leg recovered eventually. My leg still has the teeth marks actually on it, if you look at it good. But you're very brave, Professor Fox, to go and take that swim. I didn't want to discourage you. But yes, um, climate change is quite devastating in indigenous areas. And since a little boy, I have never seen that area of the Upper Demerara so dry. Those huge rocks that were always under that river, we're now up. They're always submerged, but now they're emerged. You saw how big it is. And if we didn't have a very good the Tushao Garcia, he was very good at navigating that boat because we could have ground up quite a lot. It was very, very shallow because it's normally deep, that area. Yes, climate change is devastating, and another community suffered badly with the forest fires last year. We had the El Nino drought, which started late in 2022, and in fact, while we were there doing our research, the drought was about to end. There's something known as the May-June rains, and it's also quite devastating when the floods come also, as Professor Fox said. There's a village named Santa Aratac, region number 3 in Guyana. Many of the households were burnt because of the proximity to those trees. And when the trees set a fire, all you need is a strong breeze. Well, it's happening in California right now. And unfortunately, a lot of houses were burnt, but fortunately, nobody died. And we had situations, persons did get burned, but there was no fatalities. So a lesson learned is that our people, will have to be careful about how they build their houses. It cannot be too near trees as they've been accustomed to doing for so many years because of the reality of climate change. It could be very deadly. A strong breeze is going to wipe out the whole place. So climate change education is absolutely necessary. And we need mitigation efforts in Guyana. We have to congratulate the Civil Defense Commission in Guyana. They did an excellent job in rescuing many of our people who suffered due to these forest fires during the last El Nino drought. But what is needed is um, systems in place to listen to indigenous people who could predict these things coming. There's a tendency not to listen to indigenous people, to laugh at them, and to say, "Oh, your thinking is outdated. Your thinking is primitive." That has to change. I'll just go across to a project being planned in region number 7 in the upper Mazaruni River. It's a hydroelectric project. There was an indigenous researcher who advised the government of Guyana, please do not go ahead with that hydroelectric project because it is offensive to the Akawayo, Arikuna, and Patamona water spirits. Sadly, it's sad to say, the politicians laughed at her and said, "Oh, you're talking foolishness. We don't have water spirits anymore these days. The days of water spirits were before Columbus." Well, she actually predicted in the 70s that the party is going to have problems. It's going to, it's going to not be blessed. And exactly that's happening. They're having difficulties getting funding and investors, etc. So my advice is that let's listen to what the indigenous people have to say. It might sound foolish, yes. It may sound non-modern, not enlightened, but please listen to them when they're talking about climate change issues. A hydroelectric plant is going to affect the biodiversity of the waterways. The fishes actually migrate upstream. When you put that barrier there, they can't do that anymore. The politicians just don't seem to understand this. And that's just an example of what I'm talking about, right? So that's all I have to say for now on that.
Yeah, absolutely, Colin. And incorporating Indigenous knowledge, a lot of people talk about it, but incorporating it into decision making. One of the things that the Special Rapporteur on Indigenous Peoples' Rights from the United Nations, Mr. Francisco Calitze, who's a Mayan man, says is that we have to think about, and he encourages the use of the term indigenous science instead of traditional knowledge. I mean, I think as long as you know that traditional knowledge has actual science as part of it, people have done experiments and observations for years. For Indigenous peoples, it also includes the incorporation of spirituality and storytelling, but that doesn't take away from the observations, their astute observations. In fact, it adds to it because it brings a humanistic element to it, and so I think that when we've asked the Caribbean Development Bank to advocate on behalf of Indigenous peoples, part of that advocacy is encouraging Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous science, and Indigenous peoples themselves to represent themselves and their knowledge in these decision-making processes that are taking place all over the Caribbean region. The Caribbean region's plans for climate mitigation, are emerging all over the place, and Indigenous voices should absolutely be part of that decision-making process.
Wow. This is, how long is this project?
Well, the project started, it's been going on for about 1.5 years. It started, and we're just about and then there'll be some real plans that come out of it. The bank, as we all know, has a new president. And so we're looking forward to the implementation of the recommendations with climate change mitigation strategies high among the priorities.
So are the governments involved? Have they given it their blessing or anything like that?
Not as yet. I mean, I think that all the governments were aware of the research. And there was a procedure for entering into the countries and for doing the research, and much of it and some of it involved reaching out. I sent letters to various government ministries to inform them about the research that was unfolding. Part of the challenge is that some of these countries don't recognize that there are indigenous peoples that are living in their societies. I hope that that changes in Jamaica. When I first, there's been a narrative that has been ongoing in Jamaica that there are no indigenous peoples, that they've all gone extinct. And that when I first came to Jamaica, that's what I heard. And many people still don't know, even though we're spreading it and working on it. It's a process. But part of the challenge when you recognize that there are indigenous peoples, the very serious issues of land and land sovereignty come into play. And that is something that governments, and corporations that they are closely aligned with in terms of extraction of resources, of minerals, beneath the ground, and of hardwoods, and all of these resources. Many of them are on indigenous lands. And as we know in Jamaica, there's been an ongoing discussion and action around in cockpit country around bauxite. And in Suriname, even though the Inter-American Development Bank recognized Saramacca and before that Moino peoples as akin to indigenous peoples, tribal peoples who have established indigenous like ties with the land, and ensured that there should be free, prior, and informed consent before any corporation or government working with a corporation extracts resources. This is not unfolding the way it should. In many places, there's illegal logging, there's illegal mining. So part of this education that Colin is talking about, and which I also mentioned, is to make people aware of what's happening, so that wider groups of people can become advocates for protecting those resources that are so crucial for climate change mitigation.
So how are your research looking at these problems? Because they are real problems.
Yes, well, we asked people questions about the effects of climate change, on their daily lives. We have first-person accounts that are in the research. This is the primary research, and it goes hand in hand with observations that research scientists are making. People who are looking at CO2 and levels, and are looking at beach erosion and sargasso and other, accumulation of seaweed in fishing areas and impacting the tourist markets. And so there's all kinds of work going on. And this adds another level and layer of knowledge to existing bodies of data. I think everyone knows what's happening. It's a matter of the political will, and people themselves, who are willing to mobilize to push their governments forward. And I think that the UN development goals, those are still very much ideal, but there's something that people are working towards. So we can just hope that the research has the kind of impact that we want it to have.
Well, we hope so. Because as far as I'm looking at it now, it seems very, very important, very needed, at this point in time.
Yeah, I think it was a very important project, like I said, groundbreaking on so many levels. But if nothing is done with research, then it just stays there as research. So I do believe that there will be dissemination of the research, and I do believe that the communities themselves, I really hope the communities themselves use the report to advocate more further. They already are, but to continue to advocate for the kind of change that's needed.
Wonderful.
Okay,
Courtney?
Professor Diana, I know that you have another appointment, and I see that the time is sort of running out. So would you like to sum up for us with your guest?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for offering me this platform to be able to share this information and welcoming Chief Colin Cloutke, the founder, president of the Guyanese Organization for Indigenous Peoples, that has really raised awareness of Indigenous peoples issues in Guyana, and also appreciate the role that the Caribbean Development Bank has played in seeking out researchers to pursue this project. So I thank you for the opportunity. I ask your listeners to stay attuned for the dissemination of the research, and to, look into issues yourselves and to become advocates for not only for Indigenous voices, but for the kinds of climate crisis challenges that we all need to work together on collectively. So thank you again for this opportunity.
You're welcome. And you know that we definitely have to have a part 2 of this conversation, because it is very important, and more so, it's very interesting.
Let's see in 6 months. In 6 months, hopefully we can talk about some of what's the implementation of some of the recommendations.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Okay.
And feel free to come back anytime you want. Just give Courtney a call, and we want to hear what is happening. And our listeners, we are a Caribbean podcast, and Indigenous Outlook is put there as a platform for Indigenous people. Always, forever.
Colin, you hear that?
It is.
Yes, indeed. This is really appreciated because we really need more platforms for Indigenous peoples to express themselves. When I saw this notice on WhatsApp, I said, "Oh my goodness!" I had to cancel other things I had planned for today because this was so important, And ideally, when we have follow up to this, our people will learn enough. Give a couple of days notice so they can adjust their schedule, to take part. I'm sure others might have wanted to take part, but we're so pressed with so many things here in Guyana. And our Indigenous people too, not a majority of them have internet access.
Yes,
So,
I know that.
whatever access exists, we really appreciate it. So I really appreciate this Zoom meeting. Thank you.
Well,
thanks. Can I just ask, will there be a recording and we can share the link?
yes, this will be posted in a few days. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you again. Appreciate
and Colin,
it.
we are inviting you to come back and speak about, the Indigenous people of Guyana. And for you to know that this is your platform, so you can come on at any time.
Certainly.
Anytime.
The only thing is, I would like to know like in advance, because there are times I'm in parts of Guyana that has no internet access, etc. So
No, we will
if
plan
I
it.
know this,
Yeah, we will plan it
yes,
with you
great.
and with your times.
I'll share Colin's information with you, Fabius
Please,
and
definitely.
Courtney.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank
Appreciate
you.
that.
Have
Thank
a
you.
lovely day. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yes, boss.
Yeah. She had told me that she had an engagement at 12 o'clock. So,
Well,
sort of,
I wasn't disappointed at all, because as you can see, we are treading water, really. They claim that they're going to come on
yeah.
and fix the thing today. So between today and tomorrow, so we just have to hope. because apparently what I have there said is not as strong as it used to be. But we got through the show,
Okay.
you know. We got through the show. And you're looking better on the screen now, but we still need to sort out your thing.
Yeah, man. I'll check for get a virtual background. I've been trying to check it out. At one time, I thought I got it, but I don't know what took place.
Well, if you want me to help you today, you know.
No, I forgot rush out in a little bit. Get some stuff sorted out.
Okay.
And look like it out for rain and all of that.
Well, we are enjoying some sun, man. 4 or 5 days straight.
Now, a quick question though. Why the recording keep tripping in and tripping out? Because of the internet?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. It go down sometime and come back up. But the good thing is that it hasn't gone for a long time. You know, you just a quick chip and come back. So we are fortunate. Okay. And this was a good show. Yeah. We get to meet another Caribbean indigenous person, another group. So we
she sent. I think I see a notification that she sent me. His link. So
yeah. So we will contact him immediately. Don't make it pass. Thank him for coming.
We talk to him.
Yeah, you deal with it. Yeah, man.
All right. Later.
Yeah, man. Cool.
You lead us so full. You belong far away away. Ajuguala Lebobu Seru. Lida Mua, Lida Sungfula. Lida Mua, Lida Sungfula.
Well, unfortunately, this is it. Till next time. Bless.
All you gotta do is just speak. One word is enough, and I'm no longer so rough. I forget what I was trying to say. I no longer do what I was gonna do, but you're no good for me. That's why me do what set me I think of flee. Me I fi take away myself. Me I fi take